Welcome back to my YouTube channel, LC Coins World. Today we are going to take a deep dive into the incredible history and legacy of the 1974 D Washington quarter dollar, a coin that might seem like just another piece of change to many people, but in reality, it represents a fascinating story about America, its economy, its artistry, and its culture. The Washington quarter itself was first introduced in 1932 as a way to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the birth of George Washington I. President of the United States at that time. The country was in the midst of the Great Depression, and the government wanted to issue a coin that would honor Washington's legacy while also inspiring hope and unity for the nation. The design chosen was created by John Flanagan, and it depicted a portrait of George Washington on the obverse with the word "Liberty" above his head and the motto "In God We Trust." To the side, the reverse of the coin displayed the majestic eagle with outstretched wings clutching arrows and an olive branch symbolizing both strength and peace. This design would go on to define the look of the quarter for many decades. By the time we reached the year 1974, the Washington quarter had already been circulating for over 40 years, and during this period, it had become one of the most recognizable and trusted coins in American coinage. However, the 1974 quarter carries its own unique story and significance. The coin was struck at several different mints, including the Denver Mint, which produced the 1974 D Washington quarter. These coins bear the D mint mark just to the right of the ribbon on Washington's hair. To understand the 1974 D quarter, we need to look at the broader context of what was happening in America during the early 1970s. The country was facing an economic crisis known as stagflation. Inflation was rising, unemployment was high, and people were beginning to lose confidence in the strength of the American dollar. At the same time, the United States had already gone through major coinage changes just a decade earlier in 1965, when silver was completely removed from quarters, dimes, and half dollars. Prior to 1965, quarters had been made of 90% silver and 10% copper. But starting in 1965, the U.S. Mint changed the composition to a copper, nickel-clad coin with an inner core of pure copper sandwiched between two layers of a copper-nickel alloy. This is the same composition that the 1974 D quarter was made of. Collectors often look at the 1974 D quarter as a continuation of the clad coinage era. This coin was made for everyday use, and millions of them were struck. In fact, the Denver Mint produced hundreds of millions of quarters in 1974 alone, making this a common coin in circulation. However, even common coins can hold special historical and cultural significance, and when we examine the details of the 1974 D Washington quarter, we begin to see why it remains interesting to numismatists and collectors. The obverse portrait of Washington by John Flanagan had become iconic by this point, but collectors often note that the details of the strike can vary depending on the mint and the condition of the coin. Some 1974 D quarters exhibit weak strikes where the details in Washington's hair or the eagle on the reverse appear slightly flat or less defined, while others show sharp, strong details when graded by professional services. Coins in mint state condition, especially those with high levels of luster and minimal marks, can command collector premiums. Another fascinating part of the story is the role that quarters played in everyday American life in 1974. Remember, this was the era before credit cards and digital payments became widespread. Coins were the lifeblood of the economy. People used them constantly for parking meters, vending machines, laundromats, telephones, arcades, and more. The 1974 D quarter was not just a coin sitting in a drawer. It was in motion every day, part of the fabric of ordinary life. When discussing rarity, it is important to understand that the majority of 1974 D quarters are considered common. However, condition is everything while circulated. Coins generally carry only face value. Uncirculated coins, especially those graded mint state 65 or higher by PCGS or NGC, are worth more to collectors. Certain varieties and errors also add excitement. For example, if a 1974 D quarter has a striking error, such as an off-center strike, a doubled die, obverse or reverse, or a clipped planchet, it can be significantly more valuable. Collectors are always on the lookout for such unique pieces. The larger historical context of 1974 also adds depth to this coin's story in politics. President Richard Nixon resigned from office in August 1974 following the Watergate scandal. It was a year of political turmoil and transition. Gerald Ford assumed the presidency, bringing a new chapter to American leadership. Culturally, the mid-1970s were a time of shifting trends. With the decline of the counterculture movement of the 1960s and the rise of disco music, television was dominated by shows like All in the Family and Happy Days, and in the background, millions of transactions were being made with coins like the 1974 D Washington quarter. From a numismatic perspective, the 1974 D quarter also reminds us of how the minting process was evolving by this time. The U.S. Mint had increased its production capabilities, and the clad coinage system, introduced in 1965, was firmly established. The Denver Mint played a major role in this mass production effort, which ensured that every American had access to the coins needed for daily commerce. Yet despite being common, these coins still hold interest today because they are a window into the past. For collectors, the thrill lies in finding coins that stand out, whether through condition, rarity, or historical context. A pristine tela de 1974 quarter found in a mint set or original bankroll can be a small-time capsule preserved from an era long gone. When examined under magnification, you can appreciate the craftsmanship of the design, even if it was mass-produced and intended for everyday transactions. When we look at the broader journey of the Washington quarter, we see that the 1974 D issue was part of the final years before the bicentennial redesign in 1976, when quarters featured the special drummer boy reverse design celebrating the 200th anniversary of American independence. This makes the 1974 D quarter part of the last few years of the traditional eagle reverse, before a temporary but historic change occurred after the bicentennial issues. The eagle returned until the 1999 State Quarters program revolutionized the look of the quarter entirely. So in many ways, the 1974 D Washington quarter represents a bridge. It connects the long-standing tradition of the Washington quarter design that began in 1932 with the major changes that were just around the corner in the late 1970s and 1980s. It is a coin that speaks to stability, familiarity, and continuity in a time when America was experiencing dramatic shifts politically, economically, and culturally. By exploring the 1974 D Washington quarter, we do more than study a piece of metal. We reconnect with a specific moment in American history. The sounds of jukeboxes playing in diners, the feeling of dropping a coin into a payphone, the sight of kids racing to buy candy with pocket change. This coin was there for all of it, and now, decades later, it carries not just financial value but emotional weight as well. Collectors today can find the 1974 D quarter with relative ease, but those who seek higher grades or special errors will always have a challenge and the reward of discovering a perfect specimen is what makes numismatics so engaging and this coin reminds us that history is not only written in books or monuments, but also in the everyday objects that pass through our hands. And so as we look closer at the 1974 D Washington quarter dollar, we see more than a coin. We see a story of America, a story of design, economy, politics, culture, and memory, a story that still speaks to us. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, LC Coins World. Today we are about to take a fascinating journey through time as we explore the 1776 to 1976 Washington quarter dollar, also known as the bicentennial quarter. This coin is not just a piece of change that once circulated in the hands of millions of Americans, but it is a timeless reminder of the 200th anniversary of the birth of the United States of America. To truly understand the significance of this coin, we must first step back into the year 1976, a year when the entire nation was caught up in the spirit of commemoration, reflection, and pride. America was celebrating 200 years since the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, and the U.S. Mint wanted to create a coin that captured the essence of this historic milestone. The Washington quarter itself had already been an important coin in American life since its first release in 1932, when it was struck to honor the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. However, the bicentennial quarter, released in 1975 and 1976, carried a unique design that set it apart from all other quarters in circulation. The obverse of the coin retained the familiar profile of George Washington, designed by John Flanagan, a portrait that had been trusted for decades. But the reverse was something entirely new. It featured a striking design by Jack L.R., which depicted a colonial era drummer boy with a torch of victory and 13 stars representing the original colonies above the image. This was the first time in U.S. history that the Washington quarter design had been changed in such a significant way for circulation, and the public embraced it with immense enthusiasm. The production of the bicentennial quarters was a massive undertaking. Millions upon millions were struck at the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints. And for the first time since the early 1960s, the U.S. Mint also produced special 40% silver versions of the quarter. For collectors, these silver issues were included in 3 coin sets, alongside the bicentennial half dollar and the bicentennial Eisenhower dollar, and today these silver coins carry additional value not only because of their composition, but because of their limited mintage compared to the regular, copper nickel-clad versions that circulated across the nation. For collectors and historians alike, the bicentennial quarter represents far more than its face value. Of 25 cents, it represents the atmosphere of America in the mid-1970s, a time when patriotism was surging, and citizens of all ages came together to celebrate the country's heritage parades. Fireworks concerts and community gatherings marked the celebrations, and the bicentennial quarter became a pocket-sized keepsake of that era. Many Americans kept these coins aside as mementos, storing them in jars, boxes, and albums to pass down to future generations. In this way, the coin was not just money, it was history in hand. When we discuss the value of the 1776 to 1976 quarter today, we must consider both its sentimental and numismatic worth. The majority of clad versions are still only worth face value in circulated condition because so many were made, but in uncirculated or high-grade conditions, these coins can fetch more from collectors, especially when certified by professional grading services. The silver-clad versions are even more desirable, with some pristine examples commanding significant premiums in the numismatic market. Furthermore, error coins from this series, such as double-die obverses, off-center strikes, or planchet errors, can dramatically increase the value of a bicentennial quarter, making them highly sought after among specialists. As we dive deeper into this story, let us also reflect on the artistry of Jack R.'s design. The drummer boy was chosen through a national competition held by the U.S. Mint, where over 17,000 designs were submitted. His image was selected because it perfectly captured the revolutionary spirit and the youthful energy of America. At its birth, this drummer boy has since become one of the most iconic figures in American coinage and remains instantly recognizable to collectors even today. The decision to include the Torch of Victory and 13 stars was symbolic of triumph, unity, and the enduring bond among the original states of the Union. From an economic perspective, the mid-1970s was a turbulent time. Inflation was rising, oil prices were high, and America was transitioning socially and culturally. The bicentennial quarter, therefore, also represents the resilience of a nation that, despite challenges, looked to its past to find strength for its future. This dual meaning of heritage and hope is one reason why the coin has endured not just as money, but as a piece of Americana that continues to inspire interest even 50 years later. Numismatists often point out that the bicentennial series was a turning point in modern U.S. coinage. It showed that the mint could successfully introduce commemorative, circulating designs, something that would later pave the way for the State Quarters program starting in 1999, a program that transformed coin collecting into a mainstream American hobby, engaging tens of millions of people. The bicentennial quarter thus laid the groundwork for future innovation in American numismatics. As we stretch this story into a long-form exploration, we can examine the minute details of the coin's design: the raised lettering, the placement of the stars, the textures on the drummer's uniform, and the subtle artistry that often goes unnoticed by casual observers. We can also dive into stories of individuals who remember receiving their first bicentennial quarter, or how schools and organizations used these coins in educational programs during 1976. We can consider how these coins appeared in films, television shows, and even advertisements during the bicentennial year making them cultural as well as monetary artifacts. In terms of value appreciation, it is worth noting that high-grade, bicentennial quarters, especially those with deep cameo proofs from the San Francisco Mint, have been sold at auction for impressive sums, sometimes reaching thousands of dollars. This proves that even a coin produced in the hundreds of millions can still achieve rarity and desirability under the right conditions of preservation and demand. So when we hold a 1776 to 1976 Washington quarter in our hands today, we are not simply holding a coin. We are touching a piece of history, a reminder of the resilience of the United States and the celebration of its first 2 centuries of independence. It is a coin that bridges generations, reminding those who lived through 1976 of the pride and pageantry of the bicentennial year, while giving younger generations a tangible connection to that momentous occasion. This journey through the bicentennial quarter shows us that coins are never just metal. They are storytellers. They are memory keepers, and they are symbols of identity and unity. The 1776 to 1976 Washington quarter will forever remain not just as a 25-cent piece, but as an emblem of America's journey and its enduring values.